Alright, so anyone who's been following my social media knows that I've not been having the best time. And I'm actually still sick. If you guys remember, from way back before I went on my impromptu hiatus, I had some respiratory stuff going on. That's still going on. I'm actually pretty sure I have a fever right now. But, I felt like doing some recording, so here we are. And I am recording this after Christmas, but you'll see in the background here, I have my Christmas background still up. So I wanted to get some use out of it. I'm going to be taking it down probably next week. I don't know yet. Point is, I still feel pretty freaking terrible, but I want to talk to you guys again. I want to start doing stuff again, not just channel stuff, but other stuff too. And one thing that has made me want to talk about stuff again is the Disney Plus Percy Jackson and the Olympians TV show, which has basically been everything that I hoped that it would be. For those who don't know what Percy Jackson and the Olympians is, it is a fantasy series, a young adult fantasy series, written by Rick Riordan, I think is how his last name is pronounced. I have heard it like 3 different ways. I'm doing my best here. Specifically, to effectively cast his son in the role of a mythical hero, because his son has dyslexia and ADHD, and so he invented a world where the natural predisposition of demigod heroes, the children of the Greek gods, to go into combat against monsters meant that their brains were wired differently, and that they were more hyperactive, so they could take in more stuff around them, and they were wired to read Greek, so they didn't read anything else very well. And in doing so, he reinterpreted a bunch of Greek myths and sent his characters on old-style heroic quests in an overarching story that used the Greek gods and their relationship to the demigod heroes as sort of an analogy for bad parents and abuse of power and all kinds of other heavy things that are really only directly called out here and there because it's still a kid's series, and in something like that you don't want to be too super heavy-handed. You more want to present these things for kids to absorb and then grow up with. And they do a fantastic job of that. There have definitely been high points and low points in the series. Some books have been better or worse than others. There's the Percy Jackson and the Olympians series, the original 5-book series. There's a 5-book sequel, and then there's several spin-offs that exist within the same broader world, all to varying qualities. But I think they round out to be pretty interesting overall. And for all of his faults, Rick as a person has grown a lot since he started writing these, trying his best to be as inclusive as possible, to represent as many different types of people in his writing as possible, to help others to feel the way that he helped his own kid to feel when originally creating this story. It also probably doesn't hurt that it became a massive phenomenon and that he will never have to do anything else for the rest of his life except keep telling these stories every so often. Which, like, frankly, as someone who's aspiring as an author, that's the dream, man. But even then, the most recent book that he released, at least I'm pretty sure it's still the most recent one. If it's not, I have some catching up to do. The 6th, technically, Percy Jackson and the Olympians book, The Chalice of the Gods, was a, I think, pretty fantastic return to form. Like, he's not phoning this crap in, is my point. It's still good stuff. Even the weaker stuff has good stuff in it. And just as a brief aside, I have most of the audiobooks for the expanded Percy Jackson stuff. And what's his name? Jesse Bernstein, I think? That sounds right. Narrated the first 5 books, which are from Percy's point of view. Like, exclusively. And so, in keeping with that, this new Percy Jackson and the Olympians book, Chalice of the Gods, is also written from Percy's point of view. And so they brought Jesse Bernstein back to narrate the audiobook. And he's, like, I don't want to criticize the guy because they're some of my favorite audiobooks just for nostalgia's sake. But he wasn't great, originally. Like, back in those first 5, he had this tendency, if a character was named but he didn't know they were going to be important later, he'd just give them a generic goofy voice. And like, Percy, Grover, and Annabeth, the core 3 characters, their voices only became consistent, like, after the first one, really. But man, he has improved so much since then, and yet still managed to capture the feel of those original 5 audiobooks enough that listening to him was nostalgic. A huge aside, I know, but it was fun. It was a fun time. I enjoyed it a lot. Point is, these are the kinds of stories somebody can obsess over, obviously. And yet, I haven't read Lightning Thief for a while. The first of the 5 books, which this season the TV show is based off of. I probably should have before I started reviewing it, frankly. But I'm working on it as we speak. But even without having read it recently, I noticed some things immediately that they were changing. They were doing the usual adaptation thing where they were compressing scenes down and merging scenes together to save time without losing any information. Like, one of the things that demigods in the modern world can do is they can see through something called the mist. It's the magical veil between the mythical world and the natural world. And the mythical things that usually just coexist with humans without really harming them, the mist makes them look like something mundane so that they can do that. Like Grover, for example, one of those core 3 characters is a satyr. One of the goat-legged, horned guys. And while he assists the mist, in the books at least, by wearing fake human feet with shoes on them to disguise his hooves, and usually a beanie to cover his little baby horns, because he has little baby horns right now, the mist will make him look like a human. Even without that help, it will usually succeed in making him look human, so he can blend in with humans. And because in this we don't get at least a ton, we get a little bit of it, we don't get a ton of Percy's inner dialogue. We don't get like pages of him talking about where he's seen weird stuff as he grew up. Instead, we get to see some of that in a couple of scenes that reuse sets from other scenes, because this is still a TV show that costs money. And it works perfectly well. But it is technically a change, and yet I don't mind, because it shows us that thing that the book told us so effectively, and even builds the world a little bit. Like, at one point he sees a mechanical, looked like a rhino or something, disguising itself with the mist as a garbage truck. As far as I recall, nothing like that was ever mentioned in the books. And it's cool that we got to see it. They also do a fantastic job, though, even as this is happening, in the first episode, of showing us the ways that seeing weird stuff makes Percy a troubled kid. Because obviously a little kid is going to talk about that. And so the adults in his life who can't see that stuff, because their brains aren't wired to see it, are going to assume that there's something wrong with him. And even if we assume that the people around him are all the best versions of themselves, and they're going to, want to genuinely help him deal with whatever is going on, and no one's going to judge him poorly for seeing things that aren't there as far as they can tell, that's still something that's going to weigh on a kid as they get older. And so it doesn't make it any easier when you find out his mom can see that stuff too, and now it's time to tell him that all of it's real, and he doesn't believe her. He just thinks that she's being patronizing to him. It's very well done. And what is his name? Walker Scobell does a fantastic job of conveying the nuances of emotions that somebody going through the stuff that Percy has to deal with would be going through. They also start right from the beginning, baking a little bit more nuance into some of the mythology stuff that comes into the first book. Like I've mentioned before, Rick Riordan has grown a lot as a writer and seemingly as a person since he started writing these. Back when he started writing them, a lot of the stuff with the monsters versus the heroes was very black and white. And yet this is all mythology, right? So there are like 100 different interpretations of every single story. And like one of the monsters that they have to defeat in this first book is Medusa. And there are some versions of Medusa's story where she is just straight up a monster. But there are other versions of Medusa's story where she's a victim of the gods who, at worst, is like a neutral person who's been embittered by this destructive system that punishes the weak without ever holding the strong accountable. Something that a lot of people in the real world these days, especially these days, can relate to. And so already in the first episode, in a flashback between Percy and his mom at it was the Met, right? I think, where current day Percy is on a field trip with his school. They already set up a more nuanced look at the Medusa story. And already watching that scene, I was like, are they gonna actually treat this character with a little bit of nuance this time? I certainly hope so, because the Medusa story is fascinating. I'm not going to talk about some of the less charitable interpretations here, because it involves saying words that you can't say on YouTube anymore. But you should go look into the different interpretations of the Medusa story. They're all very interesting, and so, I don't know, you got me thinking. It got me thinking immediately. Without actually detracting from my enjoyment of all the things that they were basically translating directly from page to screen. Like the opening dialogue of this is some of Percy's inner dialogue, and it's literally just the opening lines of the first book changed up a little bit to work for a TV show, and then spoken by the main actor. And then just like the book does, it opens with one of the Furies, one of the three Furies from the underworld, seeking Percy at his school, not knowing for sure that he's the person they're seeking, but suspecting it. And then once they know for sure, attacking him. But not really attacking him, because the Furies are really freaking powerful. Like, somebody who doesn't know who they are yet, a demigod who doesn't know who they are yet, shouldn't be able to defeat one. Seemingly because she is looking for something, that she wants something from him, and he ends up killing her in the process, which, I mean, they're mythical monsters, they just come back. But, it's a big deal. And even though they compress the scene down so that it happens outside of the museum instead of taking us back into the museum and happening there, it is still otherwise a direct translation of the scene from page to screen. From Percy returning home to find his deadbeat stepdad being a deadbeat who financially abuses Percy and his mom and belittles Percy at every opportunity, and who we find out later in the book hits Percy's mom, to Percy finding his mom, waiting to take him to their favorite vacation cabin because the incident with the Fury, the fallout from it, has gotten Percy kicked out of another school, to Grover showing up at the cabin to take Percy to camp, the only place that he as a half-blood can be safe from monsters, because he has started to awaken his powers and now the monsters can sense him, to his mom being caught by the Minotaur and seemingly killed, to Percy killing the Minotaur in a straight-up confrontation, something that somebody who doesn't know who they are also shouldn't be able to do, and yet he's able to do it. All of that with some minor variations to, like, add exposition to the dialogue that needs to be there, or to give the characters a chance to be a little quippy with each other, or to act a little bit, to emote a little bit. That's all exactly how I pictured it. Right down to the Minotaur wearing briefs. Like, I don't remember if that's exactly the detail from the book, but Rick does this a lot with the mythological things. And part of it is seemingly to modernize the myths, to add details to them that come from the modern world, so that they don't feel so old and dusty. But I've always thought there was another reason for it. I always thought that those details were there almost to make the mythological stuff feel a little more mundane. Because you have to realize, back in the day when these myths were still being told and people still worshipped these gods, not that I still think some people do. You know what I mean. Back in the days of like ancient Greece or whatever. These were stories that people would tell just like any modern mundane colloquialism that we tell now. And so while the idea of a half man, half bull was definitely something that, like, you wouldn't walk down the street and see that, it wasn't mythological like it is now. And so I always felt that Rick adding those modern elements to the mythological stuff was a way of making the stories feel like that to us now. Does that make sense? And the Percy Jackson movies, the first one at least, the second one tried to a little bit and failed, but the first one at least didn't even try to do this. It didn't even try to bring these elements in. I'm so happy that this show is, because it's such an integral part of the whole thing. Like, the Olympians have moved with the center of culture, whatever that means, but they've moved to New York. Olympus is now above the Empire State Building in the clouds. So, of course, elements new to the myths will have been swept up into all of these mythological elements, mixed in with all these mythological elements. Like Olympus can't be sitting atop the Empire State Building and that not be true. It's not how it works. Camp looks good. We knew that from the trailer, though. And the casting has been very on point so far. I will say, though, in these first couple of episodes, the ones that I'm talking about today, assuming I don't go on any more massive tangents, I've gone on like 7 so far. In these first couple episodes, the character of Chiron kind of gets the shaft a little bit. Chiron is Mr. Brunner, Percy's teacher at the school that he gets kicked out of at the start of this story. And he was the only teacher who ever believed in Percy. And so when he starts to talk about how, and this is more the book than the show, he starts to talk about how it's a good thing that Percy is leaving school. Percy gets really upset about that. And then Percy ends up at camp and finds out that he's Chiron, the trainer of heroes. And now this person who believed in him, it's clear that he was just talking about, oh, it's good that Percy's leaving school and coming to camp. Now this person who believed in him and cared about him is there to help him and guide him. And they definitely do a good job at the start of making Mr. Brunner at the time seem like he believed in Percy, that he expected a lot from Percy but believed in him. But then when he gets to camp, he's just kind of Dionysus' sidekick, Dionysus in this story being the camp director. And like you also get the sense that he's one of the few people who can keep a god in check. That was definitely a thing from the books too. But he really mostly just stands next to Dionysus and announces stuff that Dionysus is too important to announce himself. It's a little disappointing, just like it's a little disappointing that it's Luke Castellan who initially shows Percy around camp rather than Annabeth Chase, one of those core 3 that I mentioned earlier. At the very least, though, I understand why they made this specific choice. I'm not going to spoil it specifically, but there's a twist about Luke toward the end of this book. Actually, it's basically at the very end of this book. That has to be in the show. It's not like they can ignore it. It's very important to the plot. And this being a show with limited runtime, more limited than like the word count of a book, right? They have to establish Luke's character very quickly here so that twist will land. And frankly, there's some elements of Annabeth's attitude towards Percy in the first book that don't really make sense. Percy, being a child of Poseidon, the god of the ocean, is incredibly powerful, since Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades are the eldest gods. They're the most powerful 3. Kind of. Technically, Hera and Aphrodite could be as strong or stronger if they really wanted to, based on the rules of this universe, but that's beside the point. Being the son of Poseidon, he is particularly powerful, and he's also forbidden because the big three aren't supposed to have kids anymore. And Annabeth is a genius. She's the daughter of Athena. Athena and Poseidon, though, have an old rivalry. So if a child of Poseidon ever shows up, being a loyal child of Athena, she's expected to have a rivalry with that child, too. And in the book, I think she says that she thought he might be a child of Zeus. Because being the smartest person at camp, she suspected that he was a forbidden demigod. Then she finds out he's a child of Poseidon, when Poseidon claims him as his son, so that he can go on a quest to stop a war from brewing between the gods. And Annabeth gets all standoffish towards him, even as they go on a quest together with Grover. In this, they just skip that. They skip that initial sort of semi-buddy-buddy stage before that, when Annabeth was looking to Percy as her means to go on a quest, and was being amicable towards him for that reason. They just skip that and have her be kind of standoffish and weird towards him the entire time. Because, and I cannot stress this enough, and this should have been true in the book too, Annabeth would absolutely already know who Percy's father is. She would have already figured it out. She would just have to prove it and force it out in the open enough for Poseidon to actually have to claim Percy, and therefore they would get to go on the quest that Annabeth desperately wants to go on. And so in this, suspecting that he's a child of Poseidon, I'm assuming, she kind of watches him from a distance, looking more to use him than to make friends with him. And so Luke steps in to fill the position of showing him around camp and introducing him to camp activities, the way that Annabeth kind of did at the start of the book. I like that. It makes sense. And it gives us time with Luke, who is brilliantly portrayed in this show. Very, very good. Doesn't look like Luke did in the book, but man, he nails the character so perfectly. In fact, that's true of basically everybody in this. They don't look exactly like you picture them in the book. Some of them look nothing like you picture them in the book. And yet I think everybody in this does a fantastic job. Especially the young actors. They're great. As we move into the second episode and we start to see more of these characters interacting with each other in the world, I never once doubt that any of these people are the people that they're portraying. Annabeth is cold and analytical at least as much as she is emotional. She is someone who has to open up, and it's a little harder for her to make meaningful connections with people. Grover is kind of skittish and quiet and shy. Percy is a little more bombastic, a little more, he says it in the third episode himself, impertinent. And man, he is so mad at the gods. He shows up at this camp, and he's told that the gods hardly ever claim their demigod children, and the gods never see their children, and that all these people are basically abandoned and left here. And he just starts calling out this bullshit, left and right. Even though everybody is like, you can't say that. He just doesn't care. And that's so Percy, man. It's just so good. Like, they even use the line, you can't make the gods do anything. By the end of this story, and not literally this first one, but this I'm assuming 5-season arc, he will. And it will be the best positive change in the way the gods interact with their children that has happened in millennia. And like, I know the gods aren't real, that the Camp Appa is not real, it's not like he's affecting real people, but it makes a statement, man. A statement which I'm sure has affected real people, and that's really what you want out of your writing, right? I did mention back when I was talking about the trailer for this show, though, that it looked like they were going in a different direction with some of the content than the book did. Specifically, the book Lightning Thief was driven by mysteries. We went from one mystery to the next. Who is Percy? Then who is Percy's dad? Which god is it? Then what's the deal with the quest and the specific lines of the quest? Where is Zeus's lightning bolt? Who actually has it? Why does this quest feel weird and wrong, like something is going on that shouldn't be, something isn't what it seems? And it's not like those mysteries aren't here in the show, but I even guessed from the trailer that they were going to focus less on that stuff. And some of the more minor mysteries like, oh, who is this Auntie M that we have come to who sells garden statues that look like they're real people turned to stone? Obviously, that's Medusa. But I guess that rather than focus on that kind of stuff, the show is going to focus more on the characters and what motivates them and their interactions. And that is exactly the direction they went. Again, it's not like the mysteries aren't there at all. But this show really trusts you to understand that when they say Percy is the son of Poseidon, the god of the sea, oh, well, he has water powers and gets healed by water and can move water. They trust you that when the kids walk up to Medusa's garden gnome emporium and they're like, oh, hey, Auntie M, I wonder what the M could stand for. Look at these statues. They're like, everybody's heard, like, in passing about Medusa turning people to stone. They trust you to get that. Oh, this is Medusa. She turns people to stone. They don't dwell on it. They don't try to make it a mystery. They just let the world unfold as things go. And instead focus on the character interactions. Even adding some tension and conflict between the main three that wasn't there in the book, but still manages to convey the same kinds of emotions that the book did. And the character stuff in these first couple mainly being, we get to see how much Percy wants to make his dad acknowledge how he wronged Percy's mom. Which is definitely an aspect of Percy's character in the books, but it's something that isn't really called out super hard. And at the same time, he also wants his dad to notice him too, even though he says it's not really on his mind. It is, because he's a kid. And the gods in this are analogous to abusive, neglectful parents. And isn't that a thing in real life too? The kids of neglectful parents wanting their parents to notice them, because maybe this time they'll notice them in just the right way that they'll stop being neglectful. And they add stuff to the story that wasn't there in the books, and move stuff around and remove stuff to facilitate that emotional stuff, that character stuff. And like, man, it works so well. Like, there's certain things I miss, like Grover doesn't have reed pipes in this version that he's constantly playing music on, and I kind of wish we got to see that. I kind of miss that. But it doesn't hurt the story that is not there. Like some of the elements that were missing from the movie version hurt the story because they weren't there. It's just that's a different version of things that I think also would have been good, but this version is really, really good too. And then there's stuff like the look of the show and the way the show sounds. Like, this is a very good looking show. Like, the locations, again, like the characters, they aren't exactly how I pictured them from the book, and yet they still evoke the locations from the book. Like the circle of the cabins at camp for the children of the various gods. The location of the cabins doesn't look exactly like I pictured it from the book, but I still look at that. Would it be a set if it's outside? I don't know what you call that. That location, it's still recognizable as that location. The big house where Dionysus keeps the camp office, and where you go to be healed if you're sick or injured, doesn't look exactly like I pictured the big house, and yet it's still recognizable as the big house. And the sound in this is fantastic. The score is beautiful, and every sound effect, like nothing has been jarring or weird or wrong or taken me out of the story even once. And they're setting up stuff that wasn't really properly set up in the book. They're making sure it's set up properly here so they can pay off later. It's very good. The first two episodes, like, they dropped a little early. And so we ended up having like 7.5 days or something instead of 7 days between them and the next one. I thought I was going to eat my freaking hands off by the time that third episode dropped. I want more of this show right now. Like, I cannot stress enough that, like, unless you're just extremely pedantic about an adaptation being a perfect one-to-one translation of the source material, if you like Percy Jackson, you're going to like this show. I don't know what else to say about it. It's just a dang good adaptation. One of the best I've ever seen. And I'm so excited that I get to be alive for it. That's that. That's my incredibly rambly and tangential review of the first 2 episodes of the Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief TV show. Watch it. I'm not going to get into my whole anti-Disney thing in this one. Just watch it. Just watch it however you can. We all deserve a little bit of fun and relaxation in our lives these days. Watch this. Have fun. Enjoy it. You will enjoy it. It's a good show. That said, let's get a discussion about this show in the comment section down below. And while you're down there, you might as well like the video, share it with anyone else you think would enjoy my content, subscribe if you haven't. You can also check out links to my various social medias as well as some other ways you can help support the channel. In the meantime, though, I'm going to go immediately after this record my review of the next episode, the 3rd episode. So, more so than ever, I'll talk to you guys later.